BIC episode number 76. I thought I would have a bit of a bonus episode where I would talk through a few of the topics that we didn't really get to this past week. Now, part of that was actually by design, because realistically, I looked at some of the things that I'm going to touch on at the end of this episode, and I really didn't think they were worthwhile as far as a discussion, or necessarily a standalone video per se. I thought it was something that maybe would be worth talking about in this format, and that's part of the reason I didn't spend too much time on it on the live stream. Because as soon as the topic came up, I just thought, does this really require a panel discussion or much of a debate? I didn't really feel like it did. So that's one of those occasions where this format works well for it. But before I get to that, if you'll indulge me, I do want to spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about the hockey playoffs, but more specifically my team in the hockey playoffs. But I'll actually bring it around to sports cards. There is an angle on it that I did want to spend some time talking about. And as I said, those other topics really don't require a lot of in-depth discussion. So I'll touch on this first, and then I'll get to those at the end of the episode. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about was that now we're almost approaching the Final Four. We've got most of the matchups figured out now. We're really just waiting on Edmonton and Vancouver to finish off so that we find out who else is in the Western Conference Finals. But I did get a chance the other night to watch the Dallas Stars advance to the second straight Western Conference Finals. Now, I didn't fully grasp it, although as I was watching it, it was kind of interesting. The double overtime thing I thought was kind of funny, although I will say that it was a little annoying that I felt like they had to win it twice. I'm not going to spend any time harping on that, but it was something that in the moment I just sat there and kind of rolled my eyes. But in this case, no harm, no foul, and the end result was that Dallas did advance, beating Colorado, a very good Colorado team that I think will be a bit of a pain and a thorn in the side for years to come. So a good series, obviously, and one that I think will be something that will probably get revisited down the road. But for discussing the now, my big takeaway was really the second consecutive Western Conference appearance. And this was something that I thought was kind of interesting, and I really had to kind of sit back and think about it a little bit more because I really hadn't grasped it or really considered it in that way. And I kind of had to go back and review the hockey reference page because I had to jar my memory a little bit and try to remember the last time that was the case. And I actually had to go back all the way to the heyday, like the high watermark of the Dallas Stars franchise, my favorite era, the Modano-led Stars, where it was Modano, it was Brett Hall, it was Belfour, it was all the guys that I ended up watching and spending a lot of time enjoying those classic matchups. And that was the last time they had consecutive Western Conference Finals appearances. And it was actually from 97, 98 all the way through 99, 2000. So that was 3 straight appearances, 2 Stanley Cup final appearances, and of course the Stanley Cup victory in 98, 99. And that's some pretty heady praise to kind of invoke that particular time period. The last 5 years, though, have been kind of a little bit of an interesting, renaissance, so to speak, for the franchise. Even though it kind of snuck up on me a little bit, I would say, because 1920 was the COVID season, and that one was kind of a weird one, but they did have a run to the Stanley Cup final. And that's obviously Western Conference Final that leads into a Stanley Cup Final. They weren't able to win, but it was still an appearance nonetheless, and it was a good performance. But now we're back-to-back Western Conference Finals appearances, which is kind of exciting. And it's a lot of fun for me as a fan, but it's one of those things where, as a fan, you also think about it from another perspective, and that is you almost take it for granted. I have had the good fortune that I was able to see my team have that success, and I would love to see that second Stanley Cup Finals win. Maybe it's a greed thing, but at the same time, obviously, having been so long, I think it would have a slightly different appreciation for it. It's one of those things, though, that given that I was able to watch the team win back then, it's not something that I preoccupy myself with or that I obsess over, but it is something that I would love to see. It is something that I would enjoy, having a more recent memory of a win, especially with a very different team and a very different franchise than the one I remember from back then. And that kind of led me into, so let's bring it over into the sports card thing. And one of the things that I thought about when I was going through it, and I was actually sorting some of the cards earlier today, so that's kind of what led me down this path thinking about it again as well. And it was that I've been picking up a couple of cards from Jake Ottinger for the last maybe year or so, and that's one of those situations where I more than anything wanted to have it as kind of a symbol or a representation of the current team. Which is interesting to say because I did have that episode where I talked about my player collections, and one of them was Jamie Benn, who's the current captain of the Dallas Stars. Now, obviously, he does represent the current era, being the captain of the current team, but in another way, he also is, as I mentioned at the same time that I talked about that collection, he is a bridge to the old era, because his rookie year was actually Mike Modano's last season with the Dallas Stars. So in some ways, he still has a connection to that previous run and that previous team, but at the same time, obviously, also is representative of the current one. But Ottinger, given that his rookie season was 2020-2021, is a lot more closely tied to the current run. in the same way that Jason Robertson is tied to the current run, Miro Heiskanen, and the current players that represent today versus that team from 25 years ago now, which is kind of crazy to say if you really think about it. So my point here in all this, really more than anything else, is just that this entire playoff run kind of led me down thinking about how I would like to represent that in my collection. And as I mentioned, I already have some Ottinger cards, but what I'm thinking, and obviously, since I mentioned that episode on my player collections, I certainly don't need another player collection. I need one of those like I need another hole in the head, but that doesn't mean that I can't look into the possibility of having at least a little mini collection that symbolizes that current era. And that's kind of one of the things that I was thinking about, and I've already got a couple of pieces that I think certainly qualify, but I may go out of my way to look into picking up one or two more for Ottinger, just to kind of represent that more than anything, because again, it represents the current team, this current era that I'm enjoying, and obviously we don't know what's going to happen. They're in the Western Conference Finals. I'm crossing my fingers, and you never know. You can't take it for granted. It's one of those things. And they're going to play one of either Vancouver or Edmonton, both of whom could present certain challenges, but I like their chances at least against either one of these teams because they're certainly playing well enough. And if the goaltending holds up, which Ottinger has played well in stretches of this playoff, then you never know. They've definitely got the talent. So it's one of those things where I have enjoyed this current iteration of the team, and I'm crossing my fingers that I get a chance to see them take another crack at a Stanley Cup. And there's going to be a formidable opponent on the other side. So again, taking nothing for granted, but just enjoying this particular ride and this particular playoff series run and just seeing where it takes us. But as far as the actual collecting portion of it is concerned, I've got my eye out for some pieces that I might want to add. Partially because of what I said, but also partially because I've never really had a goaltending representative of that. Because I collected Ben and I've collected Modano, obviously for the two different eras, but then at the same time, I've never really had a goaltender there. I never really added a nice Ed Belfour piece or something like that. Although that might be something that might be a little bit fun, a little bit worthwhile. Although I did have a couple of Marty Turco cards that I picked up in the past, but unfortunately Turco represented kind of the tail end of their window of contention there. Never was able to get over the hump. They never were able to get quite there. Although they did have a Western Conference final appearance, I believe, while Turco was still playing for the team at that time, late in Mike Modano's run as well. Stuff like that is kind of the little things that I think about, though, when I look for certain opportunities to add some segments to the collection to keep kind of the variety and to keep the interest in it going. But as I mentioned on the podcast, the previous podcast episode, one of my key elements, though, that I'm focusing in on is while I will do a little bit of searching around just to see if there's something that might be interesting, the goal is to try to keep a lot of my resources sitting back because I do want to do some whale hunting on some pieces that I'm specifically looking for some of the other sections. I've got a few Modano cards that I've got on my watch list that are going to be a little bit higher in terms of cost that I would love to add to the collection. And really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to balance figuring out when I want to pick up one of those or when I want to work on some of my vintage projects and pick up maybe a big card or two that are involved in that piece of it. So that balancing act and trying to figure out the order is kind of the thing that I'm spending my time really trying to think about at this point in time. And that's what's going to make it very interesting to see where I go with it next. But at the same time, I will always look for opportunities where they come in because I've got some stuff at Ship My Cards that'll be coming in the next mail day, probably some weeks down the road. And part of that is going to be some small group lots that I was able to add in order to combine shipping and find some cards that I had wanted to definitely cross off some of that late 90s, early 2000s checklists. And I think that'll be a lot of fun to talk about when I get that in hand. So we'll see kind of how those things play out. But just some things that are currently on my mind as far as that piece is concerned. Okay, now with all that said, let me get on to the other two topics that I wanted to touch on here before I finish this episode. And the first one was the new PSA slab, which kind of, I was very dismissive of it on kind of the live stream. But part of the reason for that, honestly, was just because it's not a really big deal. I understood why PSA announced it, because obviously if you're going to make a change to the slab, and people are going to ask anyway, you may as well tell them in advance so that they know it's coming. I did kind of chuckle, though, that the question was brought up about the development time. It's like, do they need it? It's like, truthfully, I don't care. They can take 30 years to develop it if they want to. In reality, if it's an improvement, I'll judge it when I've got one in hand. But if it's an improvement, it's an improvement. And I would like all the grading companies to keep developing and improving their slabs and their technologies and their processes. So anything that's an improvement in those regards, I'm in favor of. So it's one of those things where I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about it. I'm certainly not going to crack out anything to put it in a new holder, but I'm also not morally opposed to getting an enhanced version of the holder or some kind of an improvement in the current one. So for my next PSA order, which I did drop off some cards at the last Sexpo, more than likely they'll fall under this new holder, so I'll probably get a chance to be able to put this side by side with the previous ones and be able to judge for myself and give you a little bit more thoughts and feedback on that. But overall, I'm never going to complain about any kind of an improvement or enhancement as long as it is an improvement or an enhancement. So that's kind of the thoughts on that one. Lastly, let's get into talking about a little bit about GameStop. So GameStop entering into kind of the graded card space, so to speak. And again, I was a little bit dismissive of it, but this was more from a kind of comedic side of it because I was a little tongue-in-cheek because really for me, this is not a bad thing per se. It's not a good thing per se, but it's just kind of neutral. And part of the reason for that is just having another player in the space that's buying cards is fine. But in traditional GameStop fashion, I really had no confidence that they would spend top dollar in order to really pay people, I guess, quote unquote, fair market value. And I feel like there's probably other venues that you could probably do better. But I'm also not opposed to it. If someone really wants to sell them their cards to get some GameStop credit, hey, fair value to you. If you can find some arbitrage opportunities and you do find some windows there where maybe they make a mistake and want to take advantage of it, by all means. But at the same time, I suspect if the buy price is as low as, has been reported or as I've been hearing from some videos I've watched, the likelihood is they're not going to get that many cards. So I don't think it's really going to move the needle for GameStop themselves at all, really. And it's not going to move the needle for the market either. It's just, it exists. It's like having some random that say, hey, we're going to buy some slabs at a very small amount if you'll actually sell them to us. And if you won't, then you won't. And that was kind of the reason that led me down that thought process, is that I kept looking at it and asking myself, okay, do I really think it's going to impact anything? And I kept coming to no, because truthfully, I think right now GameStop is grasping at straws. I think they're trying everything and anything. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if they try this. It wouldn't surprise me if they try to find another collectible category or two, because the physical games are starting to dwindle away. We're seeing some of that with physical media as far as Blu-rays and DVDs and things like that. Obviously, you can still buy them, but certain retailers are stopping to carry those, and the market is moving away from that. And when we're talking about games, a lot of times it's just more convenient to download. So I understand when one of your profit models is starting to go away, that you're going to be looking for other alternatives. At least with cards, you have a physical item that hasn't been completely replaced by a digital version. Realistically, unless you just enjoy owning a disc today, the likelihood is you're not really that attached nostalgically to a DVD with a game versus being able to download code. Now, there is a whole other aspect, a whole other conversation that I leave to the game YouTube channels and different discussions as far as the whole idea of ownership versus not ownership. And that has become murkier over the years with, day one downloads and the fact that the game systems are connected to the internet and servers and a lot of the issues that can come across as a result of that. That's a whole different discussion. But the point is that the physical disc itself has become less and less important as time has gone on. So it's one of those things where a GameStop becomes more and more obsolete as each year goes by. And realistically, they need things like this or things like the used games because that's their last thing. But I think each generation that goes by, if they become less nostalgic for the physical media, in this case, the discs or the cartridges or whatever the case may be, I think it becomes tougher and tougher for a GameStop to have a model like that. So it wouldn't surprise me if they go even further into some of these. They've already got Funko Pops. They've already got some of these kind of items. But at this point, I'm sure there's a whiteboard somewhere in GameStop headquarters full of increasingly terrible ideas. I'm sure there's Beanie Babies on there. I'm sure there's Pogs on there. Pick your dead trend. Why would you even? And I would love to hear the announcement of GameStop, hey, we'll take Pogs. And I would love to hear the videos that would come out of that. I'm not predicting that, certainly. I'm joking mostly here. But the point that I'm getting at is that I'm sure at this point, there is no idea, no matter how stupid, that someone at GameStop hasn't at least pitched to somebody that they haven't at least given a moment of thought to. Whatever they think they can do that will potentially make them $1, they'll give it a shot. And you can kind of feel that by the fact that this rollout and the concept and everything feels really half-baked. And that's kind of the point with a lot of this. That's the reason why I just kind of looked at it. I thought it was interesting. I was a bit of curiosity more than anything else. But I also didn't feel like there was that much to discuss or debate. GameStop is going to GameStop. They're going to basically have it as a half-baked idea that they'll try for a little while. And if it doesn't work, then they'll abandon and move on to the next thing. Get ready for the Pogs. Get ready for the Beanie Babies. Maybe that'll be the next thing. Or maybe they'll actually do graded video games, which at least thematically would make more sense. But who knows with GameStop? With that said, I think I'll finish up on this thought. And that is that I am enjoying looking into a lot of the different machinations of a lot of these companies and things. There's nothing wrong with a lot of these things going on and being able to have something at least to be able to consider. Although a lot of these things really aren't going to move the needle necessarily right away. It's kind of the things that we've talked about, and I think the tenor of the live stream has really reflected that, because even though they are kind of stories per se, there's not really a lot of energy or time that we can spend on it. That's part of the reason why I thought it was so funny that we wound down the rabbit hole of talking about one-hit wonders and music and things like that, because the Friday live stream is a discussion above all else. It's one of those things where we're spending the time sitting back, just hanging out and talking about whatever. I have no objection to spending a good chunk of the time talking about card-related topics if I think there's interesting ones worthwhile, but I have found myself a little bit bored with a lot of the general discussion that goes around a lot of the stuff currently, because it just feels like a lot of the same. Even a lot of the industry stuff is pretty straightforward. Like, there's not that much that's going on with it. We did the Cards HQ talk when they were earlier in their development. We've talked about some of the Fanatics stuff going on with the current conference and everything. But again, a lot of it is wait and see, just to see what happens. The only real other shoe to drop that we're waiting on is what finally happens with Fanatics and Panini. And that's the next thing that's going to determine, I think, where a lot of these things are going to go going forward. And obviously I didn't mention it here, but Panini lost another license when Fanatics was able to, well, Fanatics/Topps was able to get their hands on Premier League. Now, I'm not a soccer card guy, but obviously, given that that includes also the sticker portion of it, so I guess this is like a third topic, a little bonus one here at the end, but since it includes the sticker portion of it as well, it's yet another shot across the bow to Panini. So it almost feels like more and more they've added these additional body blows in addition to everything else that they've been doing, and you got to give Panini credit to a certain degree with how stubborn they've been with a lot of this. It's one of those things where I guess a lesser company would have at least thrown in the towel by now, but they continue to stubbornly hang on. But I think with the sticker thing being such a big deal for them, especially over in Europe, I think that's one of those things where long term it might be wise for them to figure out some kind of an exit strategy, something that they can do that is going to either spin off the company into a couple of components or just finally capitulate and come to some kind of a deal with Topps/Fanatics. I don't know what that would look like, but obviously that'll have a big say in what happens going forward, because it would finally get the licenses under Fanatics. I'm not the one who's going to sit here and say that's good or bad. Let's be realistic about it. You know, having a monopoly of that type is probably a bad thing, but realistically it's coming. It's going to happen anyway. But from a discussion standpoint, it definitely gives things to talk about, things to speculate on, and things to predict, and, you know, take our shot in the dark and try to figure it out. So that's why that's the other kind of big shoe to drop that I'm waiting on. Because between that and, you know, we're still a couple months away from the not national coverage that I'm going to enjoy doing, we've got a little bit of time between now and then to where hopefully we can fill it. So, as always, I will look up to the content gods to help us out on this one. We'll see. But it'll be interesting to see if this most recent move from Fanatics kind of pushes Panini over the edge finally. So that's it for me, a little bit of a solo pod. I wanted to talk about a couple of things, so hopefully, go Dallas, go Stars. I'm looking forward to hopefully having a little bit more of a run to talk about. We'll have some fun with that. From the YouTube side of things, there are more videos coming up on the channel. Live streams are on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we talk about a variety of things. I won't even just say hobby things. It's just things in general. And I'll see if I can invite some folks down in to bring some additional voices into it and also possibly introduce some other topics. We can have some fun with that, hopefully. But it's been a lot of fun. Even though, like I said, it's been a little quieter on the hobby news-wise side of things, it's been a lot of fun to still find things to talk about and chat about anyway, just hang out on a Friday night. So from the YouTube side of things, that's it from me. In terms of engagement, I would appreciate if you would like the video, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that kind of engagement. As I said, there will be more videos and live streams coming up, but also you can check this out wherever you get your podcasts, because it is available in audio version, so hopefully you enjoy that as well. And if you could leave a 5-star review or wherever kind of engagement is there, that is also appreciated. With that said, that's it from me, episode 76 of the BIC podcast, and we'll catch you in the next one.